day everyone, so hope you're all doing really well. Today's video is going to be a longer video because I want to deep dive into Kokomi's writing and the characterization of her character as Hoya presented her during the Inazuma Archon quest as well as during her story quest. Now this video also serves effectively as a response to Otsukuri and Chill with Esther's video, in which both of them argued that Kokomi essentially has been ruined, or her writing has been ruined, primarily due to a lack of screen time, the game telling you a lot of things about her but not showing you enough, if I can pretty much put that in as a summary. Now I really encourage you to look at both of their videos in detail, get the full context, and also be aware that certain things, like for instance in Otsukuri's video talking about like what was Kokomi's endgame goal in declaring war, and Kokomi is just another gene archetype, those are the sorts of things that, whilst I'm not going to mention them explicitly in this video, I will be addressing them as we go along. So it really is worthwhile watching both of these videos in their entirety if you want to get the full flavor of what this discussion is about. But basically the idea here is that there is not enough showing in terms of Kokomi as a character, and hence you don't get a proper characterization, which is bizarre to me because the way in which you show things don't always have to be on screen. So for instance, take the war that Kokomi has been raging against the Raiden Shogun. You are told once you get into Inazuma that the Watatsumi of a resistance group has been actively pushing back against the Shogun's forces despite being outnumbered and not having access to as many resources, to the point that they actually set up camp right here on this island. It's Yashiori Island, and they've been pushing the lines ever further and further. So in other words, the Kujo encampment is being pushed back and back and back. That in and of itself, the fact that you've survived for a year, which is kind of, the significance of that's kind of just being ignored by everyone. The fact that you've survived and actively are pushing, repealing the Shogun's forces must tell you that whoever is freaking running this army has got to be very competent at the minimum. I don't need to see Kokomi on the front line healing soldiers and battling in order to know that she is good. We've gotten enough testimony, indirect testimony from Goro and from her troops in her competence as a leader, as exemplified by the numerous amounts of victories they've had, and the fact that they've got an entire set of directives if they don't know what to do. If Kokomi is not present, Kokomi still has methods of communicating with them via her directives to lead them to victory. This to me is a classic example of creating world building and setting up a character that we eventually meet here on Nazuchi Beach in order to like really properly frame what the status of this character is and why she is so significant. And also it kind of makes sense. Why do you want someone that has shown to be the healer, to be the person managing the entirety of Watatsumi Island? Why do you want her on the front lines? It's not going to make a lot of sense. So that is a pretty good example of exactly where indirect storytelling, seeing the clues that are left in the environment, gives you context as to what caused certain effects. And this is just what starts giving you the skeleton of whom Kokomi is as a character. But it obviously goes a bit deeper than this. So from Kokomi's story quest, there are 9 things that I've picked up that really add to her character as a military genius. The first being that she set up a decree to prevent price manipulation of essential goods post-war. Effectively, she and the traveler recovered a merchant's goods, and she even figured out that this merchant wanted to profit illegally on Watatsumi Island by selling these goods to her residents at a massively inflated price. I'm not just making this up. There's an actual evidence folder that I have for this. You can quickly read what we've got here on screen. But this all is just evidence that attests to what I've just said. So this tells you that Kokomi herself is, at least, if you didn't know anything else about her, aware, or she's got a base level of competence to know, that it's not just the war that's now over, but that there is more going on to it, and that she needs to take care in handling the post-war recovery phase. I mean, that is just like what you'd expect from someone in her position. The one thing that we have not seen, and this is the second talking point, is that Kokomi herself is very good at strategy. So one of the things we don't see directly during the war is how Kokomi's strategies played out, or what strategies she would make, but we are shown the Fitsui camp where she immediately comes up with 3 strategies. She talks about an air assault, an explosion, and a reaction, and this once again just highlights the fact that, yeah, it was not someone else that made strides in the war, it is her. She talks about these things. You can see it from the screenshots that she on the spot came up with a couple of different angles of attacking this. And remember, Kokomi's goal is to minimize casualties, so she wanted to do a sneak attack. She talked about disabling the enemy's morale. These are things that are shown explicitly to you that will add credence to the fact that, oh yeah, I can now understand why this character led this war for so long. The things that she's saying backs up the previous claims that I've had, or the previous associations or impressions that are given about her. So what was told of this character is now being backed up in a different way with what is being shown. And I think this connection is what is ultimately lost in some of these YouTuber like analysis videos, because you've got to draw all the threads together. In any case, one of the other things we also one of the other things I can also talk about is point number 3 here, and this is how she actually interacts with the crowd, and she is recognized as someone dealing with a lot of the governmental, economic, shrine, warfare duties associated with being on Watatsumi Island. So it's not just her military duties, but we also get a glimpse into a day in the life of Kokomi. Once again, this is being explicitly shown to us, where we can see, there we go, where we can see that Paimon herself says, hey, you know, Kokomi needs to do cash flow statement, consolidated expense reporting, fishing production, blah, blah, blah. It's just like really, really crazy. We can see the crowd talking to Kokomi. One talks about agriculture. One talks about a daughter wanting to be a shrine maiden. Another talks about, like, you know, the fact that the travelers then wants to go off on an entire tangent. We've got everyone putting in queries, requests, and Kokomi literally just telling them, listen, guys, you're too much for me to handle. Unlike Jean, I'm going to tell you that I will get to your queries, but please respect the way in which I do it. Longer queries, write it out, etc., etc. In other words, despite the fact that we can see Kokomi as part of the governmental affairs on Watatsumi Island, we can also see explicitly as she responds to people that she's got a process to dealing with this, which is really quite amazing. I mean, it does tell you that she is very organized in how she's doing it, or at the very least she's got method in dealing with things. I haven't seen this level of sophistication in what Ningguang does, what Jean does, so to really just lump her into being another Jean little overworked archetype really is kind of unfair to say, because her ways of dealing with overwork is very different, and we'll get into a bit more of that a bit later on. In fact, let's explore this a bit further. So I'm going to skip my 4th point here and go to my 5th point. Let's talk about this. The way that Kokomi herself handles being burnt out is that she allocates herself downtime and she journals the day's experiences. And this is really important, because this helps her not forget important issues that were like coming up during the day, but it also helps her regulate her emotions so that she can be more effective at dealing things. We can see this in her journal. We can see her taking a nap. We can see this through her way of relaxing, which is reading military books. This, to me, is a great contribution to a character and showcases the differences in maturity between her and someone like Jean. And Kokomi has a lot more on her plate than Jean does, if we are really honest. So let me quickly go back to my 5th point here, which is the evidence for this. You can see that, oops, there we go. This is Kokomi's notes that she takes with the energy system, so it's pretty explicit. I think we all known that. And you can also see here that Kokomi says, I've slept. You know, that's going to give me more energy points. That's going to help me go through my next task. I take a break, I recover, and then I move on. This is very different to what we see in Jean's character, and this is why I don't agree, especially with Atsukuri, in saying that she's just another Jean overworked archetype. She's not. She is in a completely different league, and that's why I like Kokomi so much. The 4th point that I now actually want to get back to is this is a bit of a very interesting point that you won't pick up unless you really know Kokomi's character. And what I mean by that is, if you go here to the vision story of Kokomi, what you'll find is that when Kokomi was a leader on Watatsumi Island, she was someone that just needed to play her role, get comfortable, but she lacked quite a lot of strong ideals when she first ascended into her role. If you now fast forward this in terms of character progression, she is now someone that actually has stronger ideals of her own. She talks about like letting go of the past and making up of the shogunate, and she talks about this to the elders post-war, which is a very interesting mix because everyone's of the opinion that we cannot let go of the past, but Kokomi says, no, I want to ensure that we can move on from this legacy. That is really impressive for someone that we are told has no character or strong ideals. And you can imagine that because if you just ascend as a young divine priestess, you're going to be lacking confidence. There's a lot we know in terms of character growth that younger people lack that they'll get with experience, and you don't need to be shown that, but it's very obvious that that character progression really happened with Kokomi if we take the entirety of the story together. And it's so satisfying to see it. It's so satisfying to draw that thread with her character progression. You can see here as well, this mistrust has deep-rooted over time. I'm hoping to raise this at the peace talks. I want to discuss it properly. Grievances have to be let go. And you can also see here one of the elders saying, we cannot just simply let this go. So this is a very strong ideal Kokomi has, which is character growth, in my opinion. Right, so let's go now to the sixth thing that is explicitly shown to us, and that is the fact that Kokomi builds up morale for her people by hosting a feast and effectively debriefing her people. I mean, this is incredibly important to allow her people to recover from the war. This is important to boost the psyche of the people and just to really get life back to how things were. So from that perspective, I mean, to take up that responsibility as being the crowd psychologist in between all the other things, that is a very good mark of an effective leader, if I have to say so myself. And once again, there is a bit of evidence for this because, well, let me just make it super explicit and show it to you, the very thing people have a problem with. So here you can see Kokomi stands in front in the bonfire. She thanks everyone. She tells them, you know, there's been trying times. I want you all to relax, enjoy. We've got a hard-won victory. Thank you for gathering here. This is how a leader builds up morale. This is how a king works, or a queen sympathizes and interacts with her people by literally being seen, by being shown to be a person that can talk to them. So once again, just highlighting in Kokomi's story quest, showing you explicitly how she handles her people. She's not just someone that rules, but also someone that can just be the psychologist, as I've said. Right, hammered on that point for long enough. The second or the seventh point here on my list is that Kokomi herself is someone that had a lot of directives. She's able to quickly respond to situations, and this is something that we were told initially. She's got a book of directives, she helps Goro like we talked about, but now the story quest actually goes further and physically shows this to us. So we know that, this freaking imaging thing. We know that basically there was a problem with the peace talks, and I'll talk a bit about why all of that's happened. But effectively, Kokomi herself said, hey, I'm going to write all of these things down. That way you'll be able to adapt whatever the situation, and we can see the actual physical book with Paimon physically going through it during the peace talks going wrong, and you can see that, hey, yeah, she is someone that can write directives, that has a plan for the situation, and by the way, she did foresee the opportunity, because it's the last one in the directive, that the other side, in other words, the Kujo side, might have actually been involved with the Fatui, which is a reasonable assumption since they were present in this war since the beginning, and we only found that out later. A pretty reasonable assumption, something that she foresaw, and that just adds more credence to something that we were already told about previously. In fact, this is the part where I actually want to go into my point 9 before we go into it further, but this is the fact that Kokomi herself actually had to find a workable solution to help her soldiers deal with post-war trauma. by having them work security. This is something that I think is really like exemplary of her leadership, because she takes responsibility for not properly debriefing her soldiers and integrating them into society, and her speech to her soldiers made it very apparent. So if we just quickly go back here to the point 7 that I had on screen, you can see here that right in the beginning, people were unhappy. They didn't like this idea of peace talks. They are still in the mindset of we need to fight, you know. They just want to attack, and Kokomi recognizes that, hey, this has been my fault. I should have perceived this earlier with like my troops. I mean, how astonishing in terms of like character exposition is that? It really gives you a proper sense that she is a damn good leader. So on to point 9, you can see here her soldiers are arguing with her and saying, how many people have we sacrificed? Are all our efforts just going to waste? This is post-war trauma that's being like goes on. The soldiers are telling us, hey, I want to keep on fighting. I want the ultimate victory, even if I have to pay the ultimate price. And it's like, but we've already gotten victory. So this is clearly a psychological thing that the writers wanted to introduce into the story. And Kokomi herself says, hey, you know, I understand that there were highs and lows. For some of you, this was a very exciting, adrenaline-filled like experience. But at the end of the day, there's another side to this that I need to make you guys aware of. A lot of people suffered. And unfortunately, you know, I need you to understand that not everyone is in agreement. People want peace. So this is something that me as the leader had a bit of an oversight of, because I needed to not just teach you how to fight, but also how to let go of the spirit of a warrior. This is all pretty much explicit by the screenshots I've put up here, but this is incredible writing for such a young character, because what she's doing is she's acknowledging her mistake, and she's actually then finding a workable solution to it. In fact, I think, do I even have it right here? Yep, here you go, right at the end, just for evidence sake. But you can see that Kokomi herself acknowledges that there's a mistake, that there was something that she overlooked, that she didn't feel, and she rectified it by actually channeling this aggression and excitement into something that can ultimately be productive for Watatsumi Island. I mean, at this point, you have to start clapping and just, sorry about the mic bump there, but you have to acknowledge what Kokomi is doing. She's a phenomenal leader. Like, this is all being explicitly shown to you. So to say that Hoyo ruined her character writing is absolutely absurd. But don't worry, we're going to continue with the evidence. So this is point 8 that I've got in here. And basically, this is where she starts negotiating with Kujo-Sora. She talks about fishing rights, tax implications, protections for fishermen, compensation for losses suffered if protection failed. Now, a lot of you might say, oh, this is just Hoyo yapping, but it's really important, because these are all of the like pain points that would need to be discussed. It's not just, oh, we won the war, it's all over. There's a lot of insight that needs to be there's a lot of insight that Kokomi needs to bring here, because if she negotiates a peace treaty that's not in the best interests of Watatsumi Island, that could effectively then reignite a war if people are not happy. So she has to skillfully negotiate with Kujo-Sora, and she does this. They talked about all of these fishing rights stuff. They talked about opening up economic trade, removing previous barriers like inspections if people came to Watatsumi or to Narukami. The fact that Kujo-Sora proposed that they need to have help by getting a central authority, which Kokomi countered and said that, yeah, even if the Yashiro Commission is that central authority, you as Kujo-Sora have no right to negotiate such an extension of responsibility on their behalf without their presence. It's just like, man, that is freaking damn good. This is juicy stuff that I'm being given in terms of understanding the political situation. And this is just what makes Kokomi so brilliant. I cannot understand how people say that her writing has been botched up when you get this quality. One final point that we need to address is the big so-called blot on Kokomi's career, and that is that she accepted help from a mystery sponsor. Everyone just goes on to the fact that, oh my god, even she should have been smart enough not to do this, but I don't think that the assessment of the situation is as accurate as people really realize. So this is the full story, and I'm going to play a part of this in the background. effectively, Kokomi said our number one priority is to get provisions and supplies, which implies that the resistance was facing a massive shortage. So if you don't have the resources to keep sustaining your soldiers on the front line, it's very possible that you could have suffered a bunch of casualties and your army would have been pushed back quite significantly, which would have reversed the entire gains that you've made the previous year. On the other hand, you've got a mystery sponsor that said, I want you to give you provisions, not delusions, provisions, like actual resources, like food and stuff, and I just want you to carry on with the war. Now, we talked earlier about the fact that there was an economic trade, and Kokomi and the island nation, as I showed, actually has trade relationships outside of Watatsumi Island, so it's not that much of a stretch to think that there is this mystery supplier that would actually take an active interest in finding a solution so that they can start to trade again. It's not that unreasonable, and even Kokomi herself rightly expressed, hey, I've got some doubts, I've got some, like issues with this, but we're gonna go and play it by ear. And I think this is the catch-22 that she has. Either I don't give my soldiers any food and there's a high chance that they can actually die, or I take the mystery help and we just play it out until we find that there is something wrong. And it actually worked. They got provisions, and this was something positive. It enabled her to build up morale, and they even started pushing back the shogun's army. So she didn't lose people because of a lack of provisions. In fact, she did save lives with it, which is a net positive. However, the person called Tepe is someone that has a lot of war ambitions. He wants to be a war hero. He's relegated to being in this department of logistics, which handles the food supplies. So he was the right person. He's had the perfect character flaw for the Fatui to exploit, and it did happen. But think about it, he made strides. He would have otherwise potentially died on the battlefield had he not gotten the strength that he did. I think this is a part that people also ignore. This enabled him to push back the shogun's army much further, which could also have protected people that were not using delusions. So it's not like this is such a black and white issue, not people, sorry, that people make it out to be. From my perspective, the real problem here was Tepe. And I think Kokomi rightfully played this by ear, and when she discovered the problems, she quickly worked to get the delusions rounded up and to confiscate it. And obviously she kept all the provisions, because why not? And then they obviously realized, hey, something bigger is happening here, and the Fatui kind of shot themselves in the foot because they gave away the fact that they are the ones meddling in with this war. In fact, Kokomi's accepting the mystery third-party supplies is partly one of the reasons that she could then start putting together the puzzles, which then later led the traveler to the factory where he met, the Wanderer, and then there was the whole Yamiko thing, etc., etc. So it's not like it was such a big blight on Kokomi when there is a bit of a collective responsibility for your person that is part of the logistics department to actually check the supplies and not be tempted by the enemy. But yeah, that is something that people won't tell you about. They won't think of the deeper optics of this, and that is just such a shame that you don't get this type of analysis when people talk about it. So whether you think it's a flaw that a mistake that Kokomi made, I think that it was the best solution, or the most practical solution, given the constraints that she had at that time. And she did correct on it once she found out that, hey, there are actually these very negative downsides to what is happening. And I should just point out that Kokomi's philosophy was to minimize casualties. So obviously you can understand why she did not like the idea of delusions, because that is a 100% fatality rate. So she would not be able to satisfy her own objectives, which would be an actual personal level of accountability that she would hold, but the game never really went into that level of depth. And I think Kokomi did make up for it by at least acknowledging Tepe's death, which a lot of people seem to ignore, and giving him a proper burial, at least in spirit, in his village. So with all of that being said, yeah, Kokomi had quite the work cut out for her. Hopefully with all of this analysis, you guys have perhaps a bit of a new perspective on all of this. The only thing I can say is that you need to understand that you are told a lot about Kokomi, and later you are then given explicit confirmation of the things that you were told. And that to me means that the writing of the character wasn't ruined. In fact, it was pretty properly fleshed out, in my opinion. Alright, feel free to agree or disagree, and thank you for watching this really long video. Cheers.